Thank you for joining me for this lecture on the cultures of Mesoamerica and South America. So the Olmecs are an example of syncretism in this particular area. We've talked about that earlier in the blooming of Christianity discussions. But many cultures borrowed beliefs from the Olmecs. So that's why we'll see a lot of similarities between cultures, including the Mayans and the Aztecs. There's so much innovation going on at this time. And for instance, there's the 260-day sacred calendar, which interlocks with the 365-day solar calendar, and it matches up every 52 years. The astronomical charts, hieroglyphic writing, and the use of 0 centuries before Hindu mathematicians. So that's according to Sayer, and I'm kind of fascinated by the concept of 0, so I've looked into it, and it's actually a little harder to nail down than that. So I wanted to add that the Aztecs were in the running for early mathematician genius, but it's maybe a little bit cloudier and less cut and dried than Sayer makes out in the text. So Teotihuacan, it remained for the Maya, the Aztecs, and other Mesoamerican civilizations a holy site. So the manifestation on earth of Tolan, the Mesoamerican mythic place of origin. So just like many of the cultures that we've seen, there are physical manifestations of heaven, so to speak, or these mythical places of origin. In this case, we have the Pyramid of the Sun. I love that it has 365 steps. And one way to conceive of this is it's a physical representation of time. This is a view from the Pyramid of the Moon. It sits at the end of a 2.5 mile long Avenue of the Dead with Pyramid of the Sun on the left in this image. The Popol Vuh, we have in our text some excerpts from it. This is super important to understand. So this culture, the cultures that we're seeing in this section of our text, they're not bloodthirsty per se. They feel like they have a very important task to carry out. So because according to the Popol Vuh, there have been 3 attempts to create the world and they failed. So, and a successful world will be people who can speak, work, go on pilgrimage, and make sacrifices. So we are currently living today in the 4th and last possible attempt to make the world. So if it fails, it's all over. So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure in this conception of the universe. So in the Popol Vuh, we see heroic demigod trickster twins triumph over the gods of the underworld and death. The story of how they ever overcome the challenges and tests include the ball court game and draws parallels to the instructions in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So at the center of all of this is the duty of sacrifice, and it began with the twins returning to the world. People are created from ground, corn, and water, and then the gods sacrifice themselves to create the sun and the moon, and then to move them across the sky. So, like the energy required, super important part of the legend, because then these gifts of the gods must be repaid with sacrifice of blood, animals, humans, and this is the foundational myth for why human sacrifice took place throughout Mesoamerica as far back as 6000 BCE. So the ball game represented, it plays out the story of the twins that I talked about in an earlier slide. So the ball at this point represents the sun, and the duty of the players was to keep it from falling to earth as it passed through day and night. And you'll see, depending on what you look at, in terms of the research. So at the end of these epic games, one of the teams had their heads cut off and displayed around the court as a sacrifice. And depending on what sources you look at, it was either the losing or the winning team. And that can be kind of hard to wrap your head around. Oh, that was a bad pun. But that's because the reason why it would be the winning team is because you would want to always sacrifice the best, right? That's what's going to make the gods the most happy. And so there's certain possibly honor of being sacrificed. But so that's, historians go back and forth in their translation of materials we have about the ball game. In South America, the Inca rose in place of the Moche, who disappeared around 800 CE, perhaps because of an environmental disaster, drought, possibly. And Machu Picchu is a royal retreat high in the Andes. So, a lot of my information for this lecture comes from Grant Foth's lecture on the great mythologies of the world from the Great Courses lecture series, which I've referenced before this semester and still highly recommend.